Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. In a televised address today, the Prime Minister, Muhyiddin Yassin, announced that Perikatan Nasional's parliamentary majority will be tested through a vote of confidence, but only in September when the House is expected to reconvene. Muhyiddin revealed that in his weekly audience with the Yang di-Tuan Agong this morning, he had informed His Majesty of receiving a number of statutory declarations that show he still has the majority of Dewan Rakyat. But hours later, UMNO President Zaid Hamidi issued a rejoinder questioning the truth of the Prime Minister's claim, while many other leaders questioned the long wait till September. Are we in limbo? And what is the public to make of these claims and counterclaims? Advocate and solicitor Andrew Khoo joins us on the show now. Andrew, good evening. Now that the Prime Minister has promised to allow the government's claim of majority to be tested in the House, although only in September, would you consider matters now settled?
Not for a moment. Thank you, Melissa. We still have, a long time to go between now and when this motion is going to be put before the Dewan Rakyat. So many things can happen between now and then. If a week is a long time in politics, a month, maybe 2 months is an eternity.
Andrew, but when we look at the crisis that preceded this moment, where we had Putrajaya and the palace seemingly at loggerheads over the interpretation of what was proper and constitutional in terms of the revocation of the emergency ordinances, would you say that now things are back on track, at least in terms of the Constitution and what it demands, both of the executive as well as Parliament in terms of its respective duties?
We are going into a slight constitutional conundrum because now the Prime Minister has had to admit that the emergency ordinances were not revoked. And so now he's saying because it's not been revoked, we will have to debate it in Parliament. And he says that he will do that, either at the next sitting of Parliament or maybe he will call a continuation of the special session. But the point is, one has to question whether it makes any sense anymore to actually debate something which is actually, expired by virtue of the fact that the proclamation of emergency has already ended on the 1st of August. So, it may be an exercise in futility, and it may have very little legal, bearing.
All right. I'm curious because, the monarch has agreed to a September vote of confidence, but, I'm just wondering whether we should just accept that timeline. Again, September, there's some ambiguity here. Is September 1st the same as September 30th?
Well, to put it slightly more correctly, Parliament is supposed to open, the official opening of Parliament is supposed to take place on the 6th of September. And the session is supposed to go all the way until the 30th of September. And the Prime Minister was very helpfully vague. He basically said that he will table the motion in September. So will it be the 6th? Will it be the 30th? It remains to be seen. But having said that, we can wait for the timeline, but we may not necessarily have to wait for when the motion is actually tabled, because the first thing that happens is the royal address, and then there's the motion of thanks for the royal address. Now, it's convention that the motion of thanks is usually voted and is passed. But should the motion of thanks fail, should it be defeated in the House, that is under constitutional convention technically a vote of no confidence as well. And it's now a question whether or not the Prime Minister, if he loses that motion of thanks before the motion of no confidence, whether he will accept that he's actually lost a motion of confidence.
So if he refuses to accept that as a loss, what happens next? And who will be the players in determining the next steps from that moment?
Well, I mean, if he tries to cling on to power, which he seems to be doing, then he may well decide that he's not going to accept that this is a binding constitutional convention on him, and he will just wait till there is that motion of confidence and hope that enough MPs vote in favor and vote to support him.
Right. Can I ask you, Andrew, just to take us off tangent a little bit, and I'm just wondering, because there's been the use of statutory declarations, bandied about in the past few days, and I'm sure this goes back a while, but maybe you can help us understand the use of statutory declarations in this democratic process. I mean, can a person sign their name to multiple conflicting statutory declarations, and is it a matter of only the last one counts and all the others are null and void?
Well, I think you have to look at what's actually on the statutory declaration. So, we have these announcements that I have statutory declarations, but we've never actually seen its contents. So ultimately, what you declare is based on what is stated on the document. So if it says something that, oh, today I support so-and-so, that may be true for that day, but it doesn't necessarily, if it's not, drafted in a particular way, it does not necessarily mean that in a week's time I will still have the same opinion. So therein lies the problem with the statutory declaration. It's true as of the time it is signed, depending on what's drafted on it, and it may change. So you may well be right, Mel, that at the end of the day, it's the last one that counts. But in any event, this is a very, untidy way of determining support. This should ideally be done on the floor of the House, and at least we have got the commitment from the Prime Minister that he will bring a motion to the floor of the House, and that will make it clear. Everybody will have to be open in their vote, and we will see once and for all, and we will be able to put aside all these statutory declarations and come to the real number, the real truth.
Andrew, the former Attorney General Tommy Thomas, in a rather short essay but very pointed one, suggested that the part of the problem of the lingering question of the legitimacy of the Perikatan National Government really is in its inception, that because Dr. Mahathir resigned, the process did not go back to the floor. It did not go to the House to Parliament for negotiation between the various factions, and instead was sort of decided by the monarch. We had, at the very inception of this government, instability. Would you agree with that opinion?
In part, yes. I think at the beginning, at the genesis of the new government, I think there was uncertainty. But along the way, and especially after the debacle of the budget, where at the end of the day, the government did manage to pass the budget, I think that at the end of the day, confirms at least that the government had sufficient support to pass the budget, and therefore any claim of illegitimacy, I think, disappears after that point in time.
Right. Can I ask you also, Andrew, just thinking about the democratic process, I mean, are there, trade-offs in having, say, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong meet with MPs to determine whether majority has been lost or not, using the basis of statutory declarations versus having it on the floor of the House and open and transparent in terms of voting? Are there trade-offs to that?
Well, I mean, there are trade-offs, and the first one is of course time. As we all know now, the Prime Minister has time until the sitting in September. When exactly in September, we don't really know. If the Yang di-Pertuan Agong had not been gracious enough to grant the Prime Minister that time, then he would basically be wanting to know now, or in the present moment, how much support the Prime Minister really had. And this is where he might actually call, as he did in February of 2020, if we remember. He basically would call the MPs to come to the Istana and basically tell him in person who they would support as Prime Minister. So if he wanted to expedite it and for it to happen now, then that would have been the option that he could have taken. But as things turn out, he's granted the Prime Minister the request to determine his support once Parliament sits starting from the 6th of September.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. That was Advocate and Solicitor Andrew Khoo on the show. We're going to take a quick break, but after this, we'll speak to Merdeka Centre pollster Ibrahim Suffian. Stay tuned to consider this.
Demi berjasa kepada komuniti, legasi dan tradisi, mereka tak gentar ubah arus perniagaan. Gagah melangkah ke laman digital untuk memartabatkan perniagaan sekaligus berkembang.
Lockdown itu penting. Lebih kurang pergerakan, maka lebih sukar untuk COVID menjangkit kita.
Untuk tempoh 2 minggu ini, duduk di rumah. Kalau kita boleh laksanakan PKP Kendiri dan keluarga,
saya kira insyaAllah kita boleh berjaya. Akhirnya kita menang.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga. Marilah bersama kita membina negara Malaysia.
Untuk memastikan Malaysia ke depan dan maju. Induknya adalah Melayu.
Balik kepada orang yang membuat polisi.
Kalau itu yang dikehendaki, fine. Mungkin kita berbeza pandangan.
Tapi kita mempunyai kuasa yang boleh menentukan budaya di masa hadapan.
Polisi yang mesra wanita, sudah tentu dia akan datang daripada pemimpin wanita.
Hi, thank you so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. The Prime Minister today asserted that the Perikatan Nasional Coalition he leads retains its parliamentary majority and is only willing to have it put through to a vote of confidence in September when the House is expected to reconvene. Today also marks the day with the highest daily death toll since the pandemic broke out in March last year. Namuddin Yassin has to fend off not only the lingering questions of majority and legitimacy, but also for the failure of managing this pandemic. So what is the perspective on the ground? Let's ask Executive Director of the polling outfit Merdeka Centre, Ibrahim Suffian, or better known as Ben. Good evening, Ben. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, Muhyiddin promised that he's going to seek a vote of confidence in Dewan Rakyat in the upcoming session in September. I'm wondering whether you think the crisis between Putrajaya and the palace has de-escalated to a point where you would say the crisis has been averted?
Well, I think it's hard to say where these things will go because between now and the next parliamentary session, theoretically, if we go by the statement or the notice issued by the Speaker a couple of weeks ago, the next session is going to be on the 6th of September. So if that date still holds true, it will still be many weeks, 5 to 6 weeks before we see that parliamentary session. And a lot of things can transpire in between. I mean, even in the last several hours, we hear of rumors that several other UMNO MPs who are cabinet ministers may also resign and withdraw support from the Prime Minister. So the situation is very volatile, very fluid. And I think no doubt, beyond the political situation, the handling of the pandemic as well as the economy is going to weigh heavily on the minds and the considerations of the Malay rulers. And so maybe along the way, if things become untenable, there might be pressure to bring forward the session, I would speculate, or some other measures may be put in order to get the test of mandate come sooner. So who knows? I think it's a very, very fluid situation.
Ben, of course, you know, the word fluid is being bandied about just about everybody at this point in time. And it seems necessary. It seems adequate to the situation. But I wonder if we can fix on some key elements, especially in terms of who the players are. Because at this point in time, it's UMNO versus Perikatan. Pakatan Harapan seems to be playing a minor role when it comes to setting the political agenda of the day. Would you agree that it's really UMNO's game at this point in time?
Yeah, I think the principal actor in terms of supporting the current administration, the current government and the Prime Minister, as well as those agitating against him, you know, comes from the same party, from UMNO. We have the cabinet cluster and we have the so-called court cluster people who are agitating and also trying to unseat the Prime Minister. But beyond all of that, I think Pakatan Harapan has an important role. They are, I think, at this point in time, certainly the largest bloc of politicians, of MPs in the House. They constitute the biggest bloc. However, we do know that the opposition is very fragmented between Pakatan Harapan and the groups that are aligned with former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir, and then the dissenting UMNO leaders, whose numbers perhaps, you know, hover around between 8 to 12 people, depending on who you speak to. And none of them appear to be able to solidly work together and present a single candidate to be named as Prime Minister. So Pakatan Harapan's numbers are, in some sense, you know, unable to be mobilized to support whoever that intends to unseat Prime Minister Muhyiddin. On the other hand, you know, Deputy Prime Minister Ismail Sabri is also playing his hand in supporting the Prime Minister. We see him standing very close by the Prime Minister today as he made his statement this morning or this afternoon.
Right. Since you brought up Pakatan Harapan, I might just stay on the topic of the opposition for the moment. You know, Damansara MP Tony Phua put out a social media post today, which I thought was quite interesting, in which he posits two scenarios. He said, you know, one of the scenarios that said that calling for the resignation of the Prime Minister will lead to a return of UMNO and the kleptocrats. And the other scenario, he said, of tolerating Perikatan Nasional until the next general elections to keep UMNO in check. I'm just wondering what you make of this, Ben, in terms of the mood of the different segments of the public when it comes to these trade-offs. What is at the forefront of, what is leading the sentiment on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the public out there is getting very upset and distressed over the intense politicking at the point in time when COVID cases are sky high. The number of death rates hit another record today, and we, you know, currently don't see the end of it as yet. So I think the public is very upset and very concerned about what's going on. You know, beyond all of this and the toll on mental health, we also have the toll on the economy. You know, we do not know exactly how many people have lost their jobs due to business closures and situation, you know, like that. So I think, you know, when Tony Phua comes up with a statement like that, I think it speaks to the gallery of some Pakatan Harapan supporters. Some people are very uncomfortable with the idea of forming a government with politicians that are tainted with court cases and would rather, you know, stay on with the current administration until the time's up, until the term is up. At the same time, you know, politicians being who they are, and especially those in Pakatan Harapan who want to unseat Prime Minister, they can't see tolerating this government even another day longer. So you have these two dichotomies or two different perspectives. And hence, you know, we also notice that within Pakatan Harapan, there are some segments of leaders who are open towards having a supply and confidence agreement with Perikatan Nasional, i.e. support the government to stay in power, to supply, to pass supply bills, do not support motion of no confidence, but yet at the same time not become part of government. So kind of meet them halfway so that things can continue, situation remains stable, but at the same time, not be part of it. I'm not sure whether it's very easy to wash one's hands in such a situation.
Ben, there's, if one sort of is immersed in social media, one gets the feeling that it's almost universal, this feeling that the government has failed. And so the initial hashtag Kerajaan Gagal was trending. But in recent days and with the UMNO move, it really seems to be about a contest over, some sort of symbolic capital, a loyalty to the monarch and such. When you do your polls, and have you been doing polls over the last couple of months about public perceptions of the management of the pandemic, are the social media viewpoints largely confined to urban, middle classes, or is it more widespread?
Well, Sharaad, when we look at polls, and we've been doing polls pretty much every month right now to just get a pulse on the country. And what we do notice is that what's trending on social media represents a much more fervent, very more angry and emotional response to what's going on. But it is mirrored in some ways in the surveys that we've done with ordinary members of the public. So, take an example. Majority of Malaysians, nearly 64%, feel that the country is headed in the wrong direction. Less than 30% now, only about 30% feel that the country is headed in the right direction. This is a far cry from a situation back in, June last year when the number of COVID cases went down close to zero. At the same time, if you look at indicators such as, satisfaction with how the government is managing the pandemic, it's very, very high. Satisfaction was very high in the initial stages, in the first wave of the pandemic. At that point, we recorded satisfaction at 93% among Malaysians. But now, satisfaction is only 38%, and dissatisfaction is 61%. So when we look at social media, particularly Twitter, people are much more angry, and it represents the leading edge of anger. But it is not totally incorrect. It is not totally not representative. There is widespread unhappiness and dissatisfaction over how things have panned out. Especially now, we notice that in the last 3 months or so, the sentiment has spread, not just within the urban centers, but now spread to other parts of the country, even in Sabah and Sarawak. Particularly voters in the rural areas, Bumi Putras, are now also reflecting on a much more negative sentiment towards government and how it's handling the pandemic and the political situation.
So Ben, how you said that that this period is very volatile, and we may see things change in the next few weeks. 1 month is an age in politics, and I'm just wondering whether there's public appetite to even deal with news of horse trading or party jumping. Should we see that happen in the next few weeks? Do you think there could be public backlash towards MPs who might try to jump?
Well, I think members of the public have been in some ways inured to the politicking that we've seen in this country. I would say as an observer of how things have been, generally speaking, there's been intense politicking for the last 5 years, particularly since the outbreak of the 1MDB scandal, and it has been unending since then. But I suppose there's always going to be entrants to the market, young people who were never exposed to politics. Now they're getting the first-hand taste in terms of how things work in the country and how decisions are made. And I think for a lot of these people, I think they will get upset, they will get turned off by politicking. And of course, with social media and unofficial versions of stories and all that, some true, some half true, some totally fake, you definitely will see stories of horse trading, of transactions and so on concerning the switching of allegiances. I think we have been seeing that in the past. We will be continuing to see that in the future. And all of this is going to rub off very negatively on ordinary Malaysians. It will certainly, I think, debase our view of the political system, and I think really affect the principal players in politics as they approach elections in the future. So I think it's very important for political players out there to really distance themselves from this sort of practices if they wish to see themselves do well in election. The reason is because at some point, all those young people the millions of young people, 6 or 7 million young people who are not able to vote, may be able to come out to vote. And I think for these guys, it's much harder to sell them the old story about track record, party loyalty, ethnic nationalism and all that, because they will form a new generation that's impacted by COVID and the economic downturn, as well as negative views about politics in general.
Very quickly, does the Prime Minister remain popular?
It's a very mixed result. We notice that, in things in Malaysia here, follow ethnic segments very closely. The Prime Minister has, lost support from within the non-Muslim, non-Bumiputra segments, very heavily there. He still has a certain level of sympathy within ordinary Bumiputra voters, much more so than the coalition that he leads. So I would say at the point in time when we completed the survey, which is before the parliament sitting on July 26, his approval rating overall, according to our survey, was 50%. I think the events of the last 1 week is going to impact him negatively.
Okay, Ben, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insights. Ben Suffian of Merdeka Centre there, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.